There's a few updates today, 3 to be exact. The first thing I'm going to cover is the headline, which is there's been no COVID relief bill. There's been no PPP separate bill or clean PPP bill. There was essentially, it looked like last week and even the week before that both, the Republicans and Democrats and Steve Mnuchin at Treasury and even, the president himself were becoming more interested in getting some sort of bill done. But we didn't get anywhere last week. It looked like there was a push to kind of get something done before the House left on Friday, and nothing was worked out. So here we are, now less than a month out from the election, and it's starting to look increasingly less likely that there will be some type of bill done anytime soon. There's still ongoing talks between mostly Nancy Pelosi and Steve Mnuchin, but I'm not holding my breath at this point, and we'll see what happens. There was one small bright spot where Treasury Secretary Mnuchin said that he thought that they could do easy forgiveness for loans under 50K just through clarification of guidelines without changing any laws. So we haven't heard any more details on that, but it seems likely that some form of easier process for PPP forgiveness will occur regardless of a law for some population of borrowers. He threw out 50,000, but I don't know what prevents, if they think they can legally do 50,000 and below, why can't they do 150,000 and below? Or I don't know how that threshold was thrown out there. So I think TBD on that as well. So not a lot of satisfaction in terms of our government right now in terms of helping small business owners out through an additional round of PPP or even simplified forgiveness. The second point I want to hit on, and the link is in the presentation that Shannon will send around, is just the SBA released one document on the clarification of the SBA's guidelines on change of control if you're a PPP borrower. We've received questions in past webinars about what happens if my business is being acquired, and they released some pretty clear guidance on what the exact steps are, who has to be notified in terms of you have to notify your lender or the SBA, how things work, whether you can get forgiveness before or after if you decide to pay off the loan, or how that all works. It's in a document entitled Paycheck Protection Program Loans and Changes of Ownership, which is linked in the presentation, which Shannon will send out. The last point is one that is pretty interesting and will probably impact a lot of people applying for forgiveness. Forgiveness started, you could have technically applied, I think it was, August 10th, but a lot of businesses hadn't been doing it. So there wasn't a lot of experience for many people with actually doing the application calculations. And so once people started to do them, I was hearing that they started to look at, okay, how does this actually compute? Who's actually gone through a full application with a bunch of different circumstances and see what kind of shakes out. And so one thing that kind of came up, and to be honest, this should have been something that people were talking about earlier, including myself, but the way the math works out is there's a lot of businesses probably who laid off people and will have a lower headcount number. And thus, the math had thought to be, if you have 8 employees on average, in your covered period, and you had 10 employees in the comparison, the reference period, that would be a 0.8 quotient. And, if you had a $100,000 loan, you apply 0.8 to 100,000, and you only get $80,000 worth of forgiveness. However, that is not how this actually works. That quotient is actually applied to the gross amount of expenses that are forgivable. And the example I put in the slide, if you're looking at it, is pretty clear, but I'll say it out loud since I know some people are dialed in. So if you take that example, say I had a $100,000 loan, just to make the math easy, and I had 10 employees, and then I went down to 8, and that was my average FTEs. So then I have this 0.8 quotient, and I have to apply it to a number. But let's say, even though my loan was 100,000, I spent 100,000 on payroll and 30,000 on rent, say. and those are all forgivable. Since, you know, this is a 24-week period, it was easy for me to, you know, spend that higher amount because I had a lot longer time, right? So I'm sitting here and I'm filling out my application. I go, okay, well, sorry, I've actually, you know, spent more than my loan. And what happens here then is the 0.8 is actually applied to the 130,000. So you end up with this situation on line 8, 9, and 10 of your application on the main page, where line 11 says this is your forgiveness amount. It's the smallest of either this total, which is 130K times 0.8, your loan amount, or this payroll check on the 60%, which is 166,000. So in other words, I as a business, if I spent more than my loan on forgivable categories, the negative impact of that quotient applies to the larger amount. And you can still wind up with $100,000 with your full forgiveness, even though I laid off people and got dinged by that quotient. So I'm going to pause there. I know it's probably somewhat confusing, but the main point again here is there's going to be a lot of business that maybe had to lay off people, but since the 24 weeks is so much longer, you still may very easily spend more than your PPP loan amount on these forgivable categories. And so if you do that, you very likely can end up getting full forgiveness regardless of, you know, a small reduction in your headcount. If your quotient is something like 0.5, it's going to be obviously a lot harder. But, you know, if you're a business that even cut 20 to 25% of its staff, you're still in a much better spot than you would be without this. So I just, you know, I encourage people to look at this page in the presentation. We'll send it out after. And Shannon, if you could post in the chat, that would be great. But it's pretty impactful, and I think we'll change the calculation when a lot of people get to this point in forgiveness.